So welcome everybody. First of all, introducing myself, I'm Florence Martin, the director of Better Care Network. This is the first meeting of the Family Strengthening Task Force, and we're really delighted that you're joining us. The task force, we're going to give a brief introduction. Many of you are already part of the collaborative platform, but some of you might not be. The task force is part of the Transforming Children's Care Global Collaborative Platform. Next slide, please. And the platform is a community. It's a community of almost 700 or over 700 individuals, organizations, networks, community of actors that are working to strengthen children's care and care system, working at global level, regional level, local level. So it spans all levels. Its aim is to encourage learning exchange, to agree on common principles and approaches, to leverage the incredible work that we're all doing, and ensuring that it's complementary and it strengthens each other's work, to undertake joint advocacy based on evidence to secure greater impact for children and their families and communities. The platform is built on an inclusive model, and it has a number of working groups and task force that are already operating. It's member-led, so any member can initiate an initiative or a group or a task force under there. Next slide, please. At the moment, the platform has a global policy and advocacy working group, an evidence working group, a transitioning residential care working group, and a coalition building working group. It also has several task forces under these groups, these working groups, and a range of community of practices. If you haven't already joined the platform or you're not already familiar with the groups, please, Catherine has added the link, and we would encourage you. If you haven't registered to the task force on family strengthening yet, and heard through other colleagues about this webinar or this meeting, please do register to the group. The digital platform is just that, it's a digital platform, but it's where we're going to be communicating a lot of the information, where you will be able to communicate as well with each other, with other member group. So as mentioned, there is a global policy and advocacy working group, and as part of that group, which is a large group of actors, one of the key objectives that the group set itself was to unpack our common policy agenda in relation to prevention of separation, strengthening family care, and ensuring that we provide quality alternative care. And as part of that, Alexandra is going to be talking a little bit more about that, so I'm not going to go into much detail. The Global Policy and Advocacy Working Group has agreed to set up task forces on different themes that will be developing very different thematic briefs that will be part of this overall toolkit of thematic brief, with the aim to really support decision makers to actively implement the commitments they've made internationally, to ensure that there's clarity around the practical measures that must be taken across different areas of care reforms, and also to include country example, recognizing that contexts are different and that implementation must be relative to and contextual to be effective, both in terms of the progress of the care reform, but also in terms of context and the way care and protection is localized. So this task force is set up with a particular focus on developing the thematic brief on family strengthening. Thank you. Next slide, please. So right now we have already, I think it's about 8 task forces that have been established on these different themes. As I mentioned, the family strengthening is the first one, is the one that we're having now. We've had a task force on foster care, which was the first one established. We've got one on transitioning residential care services. We also have 2 task forces that are led by individuals, experts with direct experience. One task force of parents advocates, and I think some of the members are joining us today, of parents advocates that are looking in particular at the role of parent advocacy and parent participation. And also another task force that is led by care experienced young persons and adults, looking particularly at transitioning from care and care leavers participation. All of these task forces are set up by members and convened by co-conveners, as this one is. And the way they organize their work will depend on in many cases, what they're, how they're formed, who's leading them. But we do have some guidance for all of the task forces around some of the key principles, and Alex will touch on that following this. Next slide. So to begin, the poll. Thank you, Catherine. To begin, we're going to have a poll just to get a sense of who's in the room today, and to give us a sense in particular of what sector, what community you're coming from. So I would encourage you to answer the poll. I think we've got the results. So we have a majority of actors that are involved in alternative care and care reform at 65%. We have also, as part of that, a strong presence of child protection actors that are doing child protection. Some good representation on other aspects, such as early childhood education, also disability, and as well some issues around mental health and substance abuse. That is fantastic. Thank you. So part of the reason why we think this poll is very important, and the approach that this task force is taking, is that I think we all know that family strengthening cannot be done by one sector alone. This is an area of work that entails different expertise, different sectors, different interventions that are not just located in the child protection sector. We know the Convention on the Rights of the Child and some of the other international treaties have clarified the importance of the family environment and family care for children, and has underlined the responsibility of state to support families to care for their children adequately. But in order to do so, families need support, and the international commitments are clear about that. That support takes different forms, it takes different intervention, it takes different sectors. And one of the tasks of this task force is going to ensure that we have at the table colleagues with the expertise across all of these different sectors, because we cannot develop effective recommendation on family strengthening, on strengthening family care, on preventing child and family separation without the participation of all these actors. This is just the first meeting of this task force, and Alexandra is going to be talking about how we are going to be working to ensure that all of these different voices, these different expertise are part of this task force and contributing to the development of this work and this community. So with no further ado, this is a short introduction. Next slide, please. I think it is next slide. It's my real pleasure, first of all, to introduce you to Alexandra Juster. This task force is being convened by Better Care Network and UNICEF jointly, but we felt that it was absolutely critical to have somebody with the expertise to help bring this community of different sectors together. And I think when I'll explain and give you a brief introduction about Alexandra, you're going to understand why we reached out, and we're absolutely thrilled to have Alexandra supporting this critical work. So Alexandra recently concluded a 30-year career with UNICEF, mostly working at the country level, but also at the headquarter level. And in the early 2000s, she worked at headquarters of UNICEF on child protection. She was one of the clear leader and initiator of the guidelines on alternative care, which is one of our seminal documents globally, an agreement around the provision of alternative care. She initiated the process of the guidelines and working with USAID and CARE. She also funded Better Care Network. So we have a particular reason to be very grateful to Alexandra. She then spent 5 years as the UNICEF representative in Moldova, before returning to UNICEF headquarters to become the Global Chief of Social Policy, working especially to strengthen work around social protection and public finance. She also has long experience in Latin America and is a fluent Spanish speaker, for colleagues joining us who are Spanish speaker to know that. Alexandra is a huge asset to this process, and we're really thrilled to have her bringing all of that expertise and those different sector experience to this process. So over to you, Alexandra.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Florence. And it is a real pleasure to be here. Just so that you all know, Florence really had to coax me back into work after after I retired from UNICEF. But I must say there couldn't be a better topic on which to come back. As you can see, since I've had a foot in both the camps about which this on which the task force is going to focus. There's just one aspect of my background that I want to particularly mention before launching in, which is that for the alternative care guidelines, I was very much the producer and not the writer of them. But the one area where I got involved technically in them was absolutely insisting that we focus on prevention, that the guidelines include prevention. And indeed, that is what this work is about. So it's really nice to be back to that. And I hope that you're all here for exactly that same reason. You're maybe working on care reform, but you know that preventing children from having to enter the system in the first place is perhaps one of the most important things we can do. In terms of the background of the task force, you've gotten quite a lot of that already, and I'm not going to go into more detail about it. It stems from the platform, and you understand where the platform comes from thanks to Florence's introduction. I do want to emphasize that one of the things we think can really be taken into account in family strengthening and in looking at family strengthening is the COVID response, where family support policies got so much more attention from governments than they usually do. As Florence mentioned as well, the purpose of this task force, while it is to develop the brief, it's to do so in such a way that brings these different communities together: care reform, child development advocates, family well-being advocates, with the hope that this becomes a tool for that wider community. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we hope that all of you, I know many of you have already joined the task force on the platform. You just click, perhaps someone can post the link to do that, but if you go onto the platform, it's quite straightforward. And our hope is that task force members will, of course, help in defining the thematic brief, but also use it as this platform as an opportunity to share evidence and case studies, some of which will, of course, make it into the brief itself, and also to participate in a dialogue with people from other sectors. This is a good chance to reach outside of the care community. I know some of you on the call are from outside as well. And to have that dialogue about what's important and why, and how we should talk about these subjects to decision makers. Next slide, please. This slide is simply to tell you about, to remind us really what the content of each thematic brief is. So there was guidance put together to make sure that all cover a certain set of topics. I won't go through all of them, but to say that the next few slides will focus on boxes 3, 4, and 5. So for our Spanish speakers, particularly the issue of legal and policy frameworks. And this is we just need to have a good basis for our argumentation on what are we basing this brief. So we will include that, and you'll see that in the next slide. Then what are the key policies that need to be addressed or promoted in order to further the goal of the brief? And then what are some of the approaches that we might use to make sure that these policies are in fact implemented? You'll see that we have the ambitious goal of this being a paper of about 10 pages. And I'll certainly need help in what to include, what not to include in order to make that part work. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here are some of the key reference documents we have thought of already. And these include, of course, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Alternative Care Guidelines, as the big picture documents that will be the basis. And then a few other highly relevant and recent documents include the 2019 Child Rights Resolution, which led to the formation of the platform, as well as the key recommendations that also led to that. In terms of policy, more sort of policy briefs from outside the community, the 2018 Nurturing Care Framework for early child development will be is one we plan to mention. I would be very grateful as you're listening and thinking through the course of the rest of this meeting, and you'll also be speaking, by the way. We will have a plenary discussion in a few minutes for 10 minutes, and we will also have group work. So you will really get a chance to talk to one another. If you could indicate in the chat, looking at this, considering this slide, if anything happens to come to mind of key reference documents that you would like to include, please do that, and we'll be able to make use of it. Next slide, please. So here it is. The slide may be a little basic, but this is really the meat of the matter. Based on discussions that I've had so far with Florence and Ani, but also with several other people, both from inside and outside the care community, this is our first shot, and it's really just a first shot at what we think the sort of policy buckets that we think it will be important to include in the thematic brief. Childcare, preschool, ECD, and nurturing care, for the reasons that, and let me go back, let me say, I think we need to look at each of these from the lens of what prevents family separation. So what are the aspects of these family strengthening policies and programs which contribute to preventing separation? So while there are many good reasons to have good early childhood care, and we can mention those in the brief, it gives having a place for children to be safely during the day outside the home, provides economic possibilities, provides sometimes relief for caregivers, in particular, say, a family caring for a child with a severe disability. There are many reasons that contribute to family to preventing separation in each of these, as well as so for nurturing care, for example. Parents having the skills and feeling comfortable in their parenting role is also a contributor. Social protection and labor and workforce policies here, and informal and unpaid caregiving. Here, the poverty prevention role is very is obviously crucial. We know how large that looms in separation, as well as some of the gender equity issues also will apply here, as well as in the first one. Universal health and education. Here, I must say that I took a deep breath when this came in as a point to be included in the brief, because, of course, it's so huge. On the other hand, we know that a lack of access to education services is absolutely a reason that people is a pull factor when an orphanage is opened up and the orphanage director says to parents, here your children can get a free and good education. it becomes a pull factor. So having proper education services available in the community is also critical. And then finally, on mental health, psychosocial support, and protection services, this is, that final wedge when families are already experiencing difficulties. If you don't have some services available, then how do you make that final step of helping families to stay together if you can't provide services at those moments? So these are the four buckets that we see so far. I want to mention that I see the questions coming in on the chat. Thank you very much for those, and do continue to put those in, questions as well as suggestions. We will have a 10-minute plenary, and we will focus on these policy areas and on the issues which come up in the next slide, so we can discuss that more, and you'll also get a chance to explore in more depth in your groups. Margot, next slide, please. So while we have those four buckets, the next part is for us to think about what are some of the cross-cutting approaches that can help. One is part of what we're trying to do for this group itself. We see the value in working across the care community, disability, ECD, people promoting universal services, social protection. To the decision makers to whom the paper will be directed, we want to suggest to them that they do build coalitions, that they bring people together, and they'll get a wider support for the proposals they're trying to push forward. Anyone who knows me will not be surprised about the next one. We always need to put, politicians need support on how to put money behind those proposals. How can that be done? Because pots are always limited. So that needs to be part of the discussion, including the actors who are most affected in the discussion. This is a long-learned lesson. Here, care leavers and disability community are some, but there may be others that you would say we should, ways that we can spell that out further. You can't have good services unless you have people to provide them. Workforce development and the concerns of that workforce are also critical. So I think we all know that both childcare workers and social workers are often underpaid, and their views are not taken into account. How can we make sure they're part of the picture? I know for some people this is a boogeyman, engaging the private sector. But there are roles. It's not all the roles, but there are ways, many ways in which the private sector can also contribute. And finally, whether that's in providing childcare in some situations or through the workforce, providing directly or having workforce policies within private sector companies that support families, all of those are ways the private sector can engage. And finally, addressing social norms, where you have an expectation that women will do all the housework, where you have an expectation that children with disabilities should be hidden away, you will have an increase in separation of families. So including paying attention to those issues also matters. Let's go to the next slide, please. Just a last few challenges before we go to our to some plenary discussion. These are just ones that have been on my mind, honestly, as I think about moving forward with this work. As you can see, the universe of policies that we're thinking of including is huge. How do we do that but home in on practical recommendations? Because we do not want this to just be so broad as to be meaningless. How can we do that even when we do need to have such breadth? There are all these other excellent thematic briefs out there. How do we link with those effectively? Involving non-care community actors when this platform from which we're starting is meant for the care community is also another challenge, and one that I hope that you will all help with, including those of you joining from outside the care community. And finally, including the perspectives of those with lived experience is perhaps a little more challenging here than simply working with care leavers, because sometimes it's people who haven't been separated. How do you get their perspectives into the discussion? So I'll be looking forward to guidance and ideas on that as well. So with that, next slide, please. We now want to open the floor, and you're welcome to simply unmute, or actually raising hands would be better. Let me get the participant list up. Do we have the capacity for raising hands, Catherine? As a way for people to speak?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if we would welcome both questions. I'll come back to the chat in a moment and see if there were questions that came up there, but I think it's nice to hear some other people's voices. So please do feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to react to what you've heard so far. And the policy areas and implementation drivers are there just as a reminder. Don't be shy.
There's some great suggestion in the chat box.
Okay, I may need to come back to those if I don't have anybody unmuting. In fact, Louisa.
Hi, everybody. This is a really great discussion, and I'm happy to be part of the meeting today with the task force. I work on social protection issues for UNICEF, right now specific on social protection and disability inclusion. So I just wanted to raise the point to ensure that disability inclusion is mainstreamed throughout the document and given special attention, given the high rates of institutionalization for children with disabilities and the fact that they haven't benefited equally in the deinstitutionalization reform that children without disabilities have. We have worked on a few papers with this UNCRPD project, which looks at some of the policy areas, specific policy areas that you have mentioned here. So universal health and education, support to families, social protection, labor market work, not so much on, a little bit on childcare, but not so much on ECD. So we can share those, they're still in draft form, but they might help to give you a sense of how to bring those things, those different areas together, especially on universal health and the extra cost of disability, and ensuring that social protection covers those as well. So I can share those with you. Thank you.
Louisa, thank you so much, and so nice to see you here. Please do share directly on the platform if you can. That would be extremely helpful. And Severine, pleasure to welcome you, please.
Thanks, Alexandra, and great to be in touch again. Fantastic framing, so thank you so much for that. I just had a question of where you or the co-conveners saw economic strengthening fit in. Would that be under social protection? Although it's a bit different than social protection. So just any further thinking on that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Severine, and just as a quick response, you know, it's so much a part of it that it just didn't get stated in that way. I think it will come out very, very strongly in the way the paper seems to be developing, because of course social protection and childcare in particular, but also universal health and education, if we do end up with those policy areas, that is a large part of the discussion. And I think we need to see how to make sure to include the community focused on economic strengthening as well in this discussion, which hopefully through having a lot of people involved in social protection will happen naturally, but the more we can do, the better. Thank you so much for that reminder. Jillian.
Hi, good to see everybody. Thank you for convening today. I'm going to throw my 2 cents in for immigration policy, migration displacement policy and response. We just see too many kids ending up in residential care because of displacement and immigration policies that are not child sensitive. So hopefully we can, I realize that all of these lines on the left address that, but I hope that in our brief we can call out that issue as well specifically.
Great, really helpful. And again, if there is some specific evidence that you might want to share around that, I mean, I know it's obvious and it's true, and we certainly know it here in the U.S., but it would be, but all of that will help to ensure that it appears in the brief. Julie.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, whichever it is. To me, it seems like one of the areas of breakdown is that families that are at the brink of separation, that the entry into institutional care is seen as a more formalized option, whereas family care strengthening is almost more loosey-goosey. I don't think that's a formal evidentiary word, but it's this idea that if a family's in crisis, we're seeing this particularly in Sri Lanka where we're working, that it's seen as the viable option and like the concrete step is to put them into an institution. And so I'm wondering if we can even spend some time ensuring that there's almost a set of, I wonder if there would be some sort of a framework that would seem as robust to that on the ground worker who's having to make a decision when they encounter a family that's in crisis, where they felt like it was a concrete step to put that child in alternative care, that they feel as though they have just as concrete of a step into a family strengthening. And I would also propose that kids being reunified or reintegrated they almost need to face that same set on their way out of the institution. Mm-hmm. We had a chance to meet with a gentleman in Sri Lanka who his formalized approach as he reintegrated kids and reunified kids back to their families. He had an entire year that he worked with each mom to get her back up on her feet while they're having regular supervised visits. And those placements have been so successful. So I think combating the institution seems so formal and it seems robust because it's formal. We know that it's not, but something that allows our family strengthening to appear that credible. I just would be curious. I don't know where it fits in those boxes, so forgive me for that, but that's when I'm looking at like the practice level decisions we're facing, that seems to be one of the breaking points. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. I think I know this isn't the full response to your question. Of course, there can't be yet, but or to your point, but social work and the connection of social work to referral to other services and the empowerment and ability of social workers to do that in a methodical way in some circumstances may be part of what we could try and be clear about. But I think, it comes back to the point of how do we make the recommendations really clear and impactful. So I'd love for you to continue thinking about these ideas and thinking, how do we say that and put that in terms that are indeed impactful in that way. We do have a lot of additional points that have come up in the chat. I hope everyone has taken a look about that. There's a point about the equivalent of nurturing care for older kids. That's been a discussion for us already, and we haven't figured out how to do that, so we need to get that in there. Prevention of violence, I think we'll need ideas on where that fits. Housing might fit within that referral discussion of social workers, not sure, but let's see. Disability inclusion, I think that we're all very clear that needs to come out quite strongly for reasons that were also mentioned by Louisa. And I think all of us who've worked in care reform know how absolutely critical that is. We've got some resources from SOS. Please do post them onto the site as well. That will be fantastic. And some points about supporting caregivers as well, and a few others. So thank you very, very much to everyone for all the many useful comments so far. I know there are more, but I'm going to stop reading them now so that we have time for the group work. We're just about 5 minutes over time. Hopefully we can catch up a little bit. Let me now hand back to Florence to introduce the group work and get us started. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. So it's actually really good continuity to all the really fantastic comments and suggestions that have already been made. We're going to go into groups that we're going to separate in 5 groups. One of the group is going to be in particular for Spanish speaker. I think either Kelly or Sully have agreed to facilitate that group. The other 4 groups are going to be in English. And the idea of the group is to give us 20 minutes to think through actually some of the conversation we've been having, in particular how these different sectors contribute to, or the different policy areas, different areas of expertise contribute to family strengthening and preventing separation. What services and approach within these different sectors do we know work or don't work? You've already started at highlighting some of them. So it's to give us more opportunities to brainstorm, to start that thinking around those. And what other issues, what other intervention approaches would be important to cover in this brief. So we are going to, you're going to see, I'm going to start the breaking room. You're going to have an opportunity to select and join one of the breaking rooms. We would ask if you see that one breaking room is already full and another one is not, please vote to join one that isn't so full. And we have some fantastic colleagues who've agreed to help facilitate the brainstorming. We have 20 minutes and we'll come back and just review some of the ideas that have come out. There's a Jamboard as well, and the facilitators will direct you to that. And Catherine, thank you for putting the links, where we'll be able to write notes around those different contributions and ideas. And again, it's a brainstorming. This is just opening in the way that we've done just now. Some of the things that are missing, some of the things that are absolutely needed, and some of the lessons we've learned. So thank you very much. I'm going to ask my colleague to start launching the breakout rooms. Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone is back and we haven't lost people in between breakout rooms in the virtual Netherlands. If you are stuck in a breakout room and can hear me, let us know. I think we're all back. I'm hoping we're all back. I'm going to hand over to Alex, actually. We're just going to do a quick report back from our facilitators. Alex.
Hi. Okay, so you're handing back to me as a facilitator. I thought
Yes.
I was group 3 and would have a bit of a break, and now I've suddenly lost my Jamboard. But let me which had been open on my screen and now it isn't. So I hope I can do some justice in a brief feedback from my group. Someone's put the Jamboard up. Can you put up group 3, please? Keep going. Okay, there we go. Oh, no, there you go. So we had, our group had, I think there were 7 of us, and we had some really interesting inputs right from the start about, for example, how catastrophic health costs are one of the key issues. A major economic driver of separation. There was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of expertise around social work in our group, and the ways in which that kind of supporting families who are at that critical juncture, that social workers need to have the tools that they need to do that, and also to address some of the stigma around it. There was a very strong call on the issue of childcare, with real examples of how childcare can directly, the lack of childcare and lack of affordable childcare directly contributes to separation. Well, let's go to, if you flip forward to the next one for me. please. Yeah. So on the sort of what works and what doesn't work, a couple of real issues came up around substance abuse programs and how they need to be more in sync with work for reuniting families. The lack of action in the justice system, not an area that we'd really talked about, so that becomes important. Overall, I think there was, I know I should sum up, so to say that there was a strong feeling that we need to include all of these areas, that they are all important. And we had in our group a speaker or a participant who had worked in an orphanage and then transformed that into family strengthening work, and is in that work right now. So quite a useful example of exactly what it takes to get kids back to families. So I think we do need to stick to the wider area, but also be specific, especially on some of the social work areas, as to how we can have some clear ideas of how policymakers can make a difference, and what parts of social work, for example, they can strengthen. Let me stop here because we've got a lot of others to feedback.
Thank you, Alex. Beth, over to you.
Thanks, Florence, and thanks to my group. I think we had some great thoughts. I actually tried to circle just to add on to what Alex has said and not repeat some of the key add-ons that I think our group would bring. One is that I thought was really interesting is private sector, and really considering how this was a specific example about youth and building skills for employment, et cetera. But that addition of how private sector can contribute. We also mentioned youth sector and the importance of working with youth around for family resiliency, housing sector, and then a key point of discussion we had was really around the health sector, but more specifically mental health, and understanding both parent caregiver mental health, but also children's mental health. You could slide over to the second question on the Jamboard. Thank you. Here, just to mention a few of the services and approaches. Starting early, this was sort of a theme running through, but really starting early, looking even at pre-birth and birth and young child interventions. Several mentions of approaches that really work on empowering parents and caregivers, the importance of trauma-informed interventions, and then some of the economic interventions which went beyond kind of social protection, but that really build up the family's economic strengths in sustainable ways. Next Zoom slide. Didn't quite finish my circling here. So maybe just to mention again, to build off of what Alexandra presented from her group, we did quite a bit of mentioning of disability and the importance of that cross-cutting issue coming out, early detection. I think it was Florence raised inclusive education as a critical one. Often kids coming into care because they can't get their education needs met. And then the other one was really around the economy of care, the costs of care, considering the value around care that parents and families provide, and the costs of not having prevention in place, the cost comparison with, say, institutional care. So yeah, let me leave it there. I'm sure the other groups have much more to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Suli to come in, because I know she's got to leave a bit early. Thank you, Suli.
Gracias, Florence. Bueno, gracias. En el grupo tuvimos la oportunidad de compartir con UNICEF Bolivia y República Dominicana. Para la primera pregunta, creo que coincidimos en que la importancia de fortalecer la prevención es a través de, perdón, pero no tengo mi cámara funcionando, fortalecer la prevención a través de promover los servicios. Ahí es importante acercar los servicios, especialmente en las áreas remotas, que es donde está haciendo falta, y esto provoca problemas para los programas de fortalecimiento familiar o prevención. También identificamos que hay muchos desafíos en la integración y en la articulación de esos servicios. Hay necesidad de fortalecer esos servicios en toda la parte técnica que nos ayuden a poder ayudar a las familias en esta prevención. La próxima, por favor. En la segunda pregunta coincidimos que lo que no está funcionando o está muy débil son los servicios basados en género y edad. O sea, hay mucha debilidad en estos servicios, en discapacidad. Tenemos mucha debilidad en articular el sistema de protección para los niños, niñas y adolescentes. Ese enfoque integrado que deben de tener los servicios sociales regularmente están divididos y no logran ayudar a la familia a acceder a los servicios. Algo que identificamos también que es una debilidad es que la resolución de los problemas de la familia está judicializado. Siempre estamos respondiendo de acuerdo a acciones judiciales o legales que no necesariamente funcionan para el fortalecimiento familiar. Y es importante promover los programas de la crianza positiva, como ejemplo, Mi Familia de Colombia. La próxima, por favor. Y por último, pues los aportes que las colegas les gustaría que se pudiera incluir es un poco más respecto a la interseccionalidad, la igualdad de género, el enfoque basado en la comunidad, que esto es algo que comentaron las compañeras de Bolivia, que es una experiencia muy buena que ellas han tenido trabajando con la comunidad directamente, especialmente después del COVID. Enfoque sobre la discapacidad es algo importante que les gustaría que pudiéramos agregar. Y el fortalecimiento de las redes comunitarias y su vínculo al sistema de protección. Y como última idea, hablaban también que hay experiencias muy buenas respecto en las escuelas, en los centros de primera infancia, sobre la prevención de la separación que podrían incluirse. Creo que con eso podríamos concluir las conclusiones del grupo 5. Gracias, Florence.
Thank you, Sully. This is really great input, and it's going to be really important to draw from the learning of this good experience in that region. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Gillian.
Thank you. I think, oh yeah, we were group 2. Okay, so I feel like a lot of what was already mentioned, we also covered. I think we did speak a lot throughout on the social norms and behavior change and continuing to center that as a key piece of the work. I think I'm not going to take too much time because I know there are other groups. So maybe let's go to the next question. So we sort of divided into what we know and what we need to know more about. And I think the trying to home in on some of the gap areas, like the link between reproductive health and caregiver support and family preservation. I think the more we can create synergies between other sectors who don't necessarily see the tie-in will help us in the long run make the case and build more of a coalition. Also, we had someone in our group who spoke a lot about positive psychology, and really sort of, I think one way to talk about this would be to turn the lens from this focus on deficits to what caregivers' positive capacity is, and helping to build some culture and understanding around that. Let's go to the final question. What other factors would be important to cover in the brief? I think, again, this focus on the historical context, maybe, what has this issue looked like over time and across contexts? Is family child prevention increasing? Do we know? What are the trends? How are we tracking them? And I think also this idea of making sure that we're looking at this issue, not just in terms of residential care, but really broadly. I mean, family child separation looks a lot of different ways, right? In trafficking, children living in the streets, migrating alone, forced labor, residential care. So even though the categories of vulnerability are different, the causes of family child separation are often similar. And I think the more we tackle this as sort of a broad issue, and again, bring in other stakeholders from different areas of work, may strengthen our case moving forward. So I'll leave it at that, but there's some other stuff in there as well.
Thank you, Gideon. That's very helpful. And I did spot one of the sticker around the role of faith communities, which I don't think was raised in other groups, or at least not reported. So I think that's also an important contribution to be hitting that. I'm going to hand over. I think we've done all the groups now. Have I missed anyone? I think we've done all the groups. Annie. Oh my God.
One.
I knew somebody was missing. Apologies, Annie.
No worries. No. So we had a very interesting conversation. I don't think I'm going to repeat the points that were already mentioned earlier, but just to highlight 2 or 3 points that came across the different questions that we were trying to deliberate on, and not necessarily going through these slides. But I think one of the very important points that we discussed was, yes, there is a need to focus on the contribution of individual sectors, but I think it's equally important that even through this brief, we actually zoom in a little bit more on the intersectorality and the importance of coordination across sectors. Because in the end, family strengthening that will contribute to prevention will necessarily be intersectoral, is necessarily intersectoral work. So we should be focusing on coordination across sectors, and not just coordination at the practice level. I think that's where participants also felt that, there is some really good coordination examples at the national level in terms of, engagement across ministries and sectors, but the coordination that needs to happen on the ground, it's something that we need to be really focusing on. Of course, other points, and I think resonate very well with other groups as well, in terms of social norms, in terms of focusing on family strengthening, prevention of violence and family breakdown, and so on and so forth. A lot of conversation around disability inclusion. And the last point being, I think, in terms of what are the other aspects that we need to include, something very specific that came out was the role of staff who currently work in or formerly worked in orphanages, and how do we use those as resources to take forward the work on family strengthening and prevention of separation. But I think I'll stop there, and thank you, colleagues. I know I've not done justice to all our conversations, but we probably need to move on. So back to you, Florence.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you very much. And just to say, this is an initial brainstorm, and already we're saying just how rich the contributions are. But we will capture all of this and share that back to you as well with the recording of the meeting. So this is just our first meeting, but all of this is already a fantastic contribution, and we'll be able to work together to unpack all of that. We're running a little bit behind, just a few more minutes, and we'll ask for your forgiveness on that, and just give us maybe an extra 5 minutes. I understand that if some of you need to move on to other meetings, but if you're able to stay, please stay. And again, the recording and information will be shared with you. So I'm going to hand over to Alex, to Tala, to help us go through what are some of the next steps.
Thank you so much, Florence, and I hope you all enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. It is incredibly rich. So, and we really hope this discussion is going to continue. That is the key message of the next steps. We will continue to try to recruit people through the platform and beyond, trying to get people from beyond the care community as well to join this task force. We hope that all of you on the call will consider doing so. And what will be really, really important and valuable is that the ideas that were sparked today, the thoughts, some of the evidence links you have, and we will try and make use of what's in the chat. But please, 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 if you feel so moved, contribute ideas in the platform itself. I'll start setting things up next week, so we have perhaps under some of those buckets, but don't wait. We really need to hear from all of you. My aim is that we would have monthly online meetings so that we can discuss some of this content, and there is a plan to try and form a smaller expert reference group for more intensive oversight over the draft. And we need to finalize by the end of February, so it's going to be intense these next several months. As you think about what you would like to do next, we've got a brief poll where you can kind of indicate what you might be interested in, if we can launch that poll. So please just check those boxes of those areas that you think you might be interested in. And as you do that, I will. Oh yes, I will hand over to Annie for the final. For our final slide and farewell. So I hope you're all able to indicate which things you would like to do.
Thank you so much, Alex. No, yes, we all received the poll, and hopefully we got some really good responses to the poll as well. And as Alex said, this is the time to really close the meeting. We are sorry we ran a couple of minutes late, but thank you so much for your patience and for participating so actively. We also recognize, and Florence also mentioned it, this is just the initial conversation. We know that in a 1.5 hour call and in a 20-minute group work, we are not going to be able to just do justice to such a complicated and complex discussion. So we will be coming back to you shortly. I think the first thing that we'll come back to you with would be the report of this meeting. We are also recording this webinar, so of course some of us had to leave midway through the meeting can go back and listen to the recording, but please continue to engage with the task force. Please join on the Transforming Care Collaborative platform. You can see the links here, and I think it will be interesting to also move this conversation forward beyond this task force and also see how it can link to the work plan of the transitioning care working group next year. But that's all from me, and that's all from us, unless there is anything else from Alex or Florence. I would like to thank all of you once again for joining us today, and we hope that you will continue to engage with us and support us in developing this thematic brief.